15 habits that turn struggle into power. Life has a way of pressing down on all of us. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what you believe, struggle finds you. It can arrive quietly as a steady resistance against your efforts, or it can crash into your life like a storm that tears away everything familiar. Some see this as injustice. Some spend their lives asking why the struggle had to happen to them. But the Stoics, those men and women who faced exile, slavery, sickness, betrayal, and even death, saw struggle differently. They saw it as the training ground of the soul, the place where ordinary people were forged into the kind of beings who could endure anything. Think about Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, who wrote his meditations not in times of peace, but during plagues, invasions, and political turmoil. His words came not from luxury, but from the battlefield of life. Think about Epictetus, born a slave, whose body was broken, but whose mind remained unshakable, untouchable by those who thought they had power over him. Think about Seneca, who endured exile and political danger, yet wrote letters reminding us that adversity is not something to run from, but something to use. Here's the truth. Struggle is not here to destroy you. It's here to reveal you. The muscles of the body only grow through resistance, and so too the muscles of the soul. Without struggle, you remain untested, fragile, and soft. With struggle, you have a chance, an opportunity to turn weakness into strength, fear into courage, doubt into clarity. But that transformation does not happen automatically. Struggle by itself doesn't guarantee growth. It can just as easily break a person, twist them into bitterness, or leave them defeated. What makes the difference is how you approach it, how you meet it, how you decide to respond to it. That is why we are here. In this talk, I want to share with you 15 habits that take the raw weight of struggle and turn it into power. Habits that the Stoics practiced not just in theory, but in life and death situations. These are not tricks. They are disciplines, practices of the mind and body that turn hardship into a kind of fire that strengthens rather than consumes. And if you take them seriously, if you weave them into your daily life, you'll find that the struggles you once dreaded become the very stones upon which you climb higher. So let us begin, because struggle will not wait for you to be ready. You have to prepare now. You have to build the habits now. And the first habit is one of the most important. Embrace voluntary discomfort. Most of us spend our lives running from discomfort. We chase pleasure, convenience, and ease as though they are the highest goods. But this constant pursuit of comfort leaves us fragile, like glass that shatters at the slightest impact. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus reminded his students that difficulties are what reveal our true nature. He told them that no sailor becomes skilled in calm seas, and no soldier learns courage without battle. To avoid discomfort is to avoid growth itself. So what did they do? They practiced hardship, even when life was easy. They would go without food for a day, not because they had to, but because they wanted to train their mind to see that hunger was not the end of the world. They would sleep on the ground when their beds were warm and soft, just to remind themselves that comfort is a luxury, not a necessity. They stripped themselves of pleasures not to punish, but to prepare. Seneca once wrote about eating only coarse bread and drinking only water for days, then asking himself, "Is this what I feared?" In this way, fear lost its hold. We can apply this today. Wake up and step into the cold shower. Not because it feels good, but because it reminds you that you can endure. Skip a meal, not to chase a diet, but to prove that hunger does not own you. Put down your phone, step away from the noise, and sit with your thoughts, even when it feels unbearable. Run until your legs ache, lift until your muscles burn, climb until your breath is heavy, not for the sake of fitness alone, but to tell yourself, struggle does not master me, I master it. This habit of embracing voluntary discomfort has a quiet power. It builds resilience long before hardship arrives uninvited. When life inevitably throws its storms at you, when sickness comes, when loss comes, when failure comes, you will not be a stranger to discomfort. You will not panic. You will not collapse. Instead, you will nod as though meeting an old friend because you've trained for this. You've practiced. You've built a soul that knows how to endure. And that is where power begins. Not in avoiding struggle, but in seeking a taste of it every day, in small doses, until you realize you are far stronger than you imagined. The first habit transforms your relationship with hardship. You stop seeing it as the enemy, you begin to see it as the teacher. And once you do that, you can face anything. If you pay close attention to your days, you'll notice how much of your energy is drained by things completely outside your control. The weather changes and you complain. Someone speaks poorly of you and you spiral into anger. A stranger cuts you off in traffic and you replay it in your mind for hours. The Stoics saw this as one of the greatest wastes of human strength. Epictetus put it bluntly, some things are up to us and some things are not. To confuse the two is to guarantee a life of torment. To separate them is to guarantee a life of freedom. What is truly within your control? Your thoughts, your choices, your actions, your responses. What is not within your control? The past, the future, the behavior of others, the outcomes of chance. Yet most of us pour endless energy into wishing the world were different, into resenting people for being what they are, into fighting battles that can never be won. It's like throwing water into the wind. You end up soaked and exhausted. The habit then is to constantly bring yourself back to what is in your hands. A simple practice is to begin or end your day with two lists. One of the things you can control and one of the things you cannot. On one side you may write, my effort at work, my attitude, the words I choose, whether I train my body today. On the other side you may write, whether people like me, whether the project succeeds, whether the economy rises or falls, whether it rains tomorrow. The second list is where most of our suffering hides. But once you see it clearly, once you recognize its futility, you can let it go. And in letting it go, you reclaim a vast amount of strength. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of this principle. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These words came from a man who commanded armies and ruled an empire. If anyone had reason to imagine he controlled the world, it was him. Yet he knew better. He accepted that outcomes were not his to dictate, only his decisions in the present moment. So when you feel crushed by struggle, pause and ask, what here is within my power? Is it my effort, my perspective, my courage? And what here is outside of it? If it is beyond me, then let it go. Do not feed it with worry. Do not make it heavier by carrying it on your back. Life will always give you burdens you cannot change. The wise man does not try to lift them. He lifts what he can, and by doing so, he grows strong. This habit may seem simple, but practiced daily, it becomes armor. When storms come, you are no longer tossed helplessly. You are grounded, rooted, because you've chosen to stand only where your control begins. From there, we move to a practice that deepens gratitude and prepares the soul for loss. The Stoics called it negative visualization. At first, it sounds grim. Imagine losing what you love. Imagine disasters. Imagine death. But it is not meant to darken life. It is meant to brighten it. Seneca advised his friends to think of poverty while they enjoyed wealth, to think of exile while they lived at home, to think of death while they were alive and breathing. Why? Because when the mind rehearses loss, it stops taking life for granted. It sees every moment, every gift with sharper clarity. Think of Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself that he could walk out the door that very day and never return. He reflected constantly that death was near, not to despair, but to sharpen his appreciation of the present. Epictetus reminded his students to kiss their children with the thought, "They may not be here tomorrow." It was not cruelty. It was love intensified by the knowledge of impermanence. The habit of negative visualization can be practiced in small ways. Before bed, picture what your life would be if one comfort disappeared: your home, your health, your freedom. Not to frighten yourself, but to remind yourself of two truths. First, that these things are not guaranteed. Second, that you could endure their loss if it came. And in the morning, when you wake to find them still with you, gratitude flows naturally. The bed feels softer, the breakfast richer, the presence of your loved ones more precious. Modern life tempts us into constant dissatisfaction. We scroll endlessly, comparing our lives to others, always feeling shortchanged. Negative visualization cuts through that poison. It tells us, imagine losing what you already have. Suddenly you see it for what it is, a gift. And should life one day take it away, you will not collapse in shock. You will grieve, yes, but you will also say, I prepared for this. I trained for this moment. It does not break me. Struggle takes many forms. Sometimes it comes as loss, sometimes as fear. But through the habit of negative visualization, we can turn both into power. We build resilience before the storm arrives, and we build appreciation for every calm day we are given. That is the paradox. By imagining life without, we discover the fullness of life with. By contemplating the worst, we learn to cherish the best. And in that way, even our darkest thoughts become servants of our strength. Pain comes to us all in ways big and small. It might be the sting of betrayal, the ache of failure, the crushing weight of loss, or the daily grind that leaves us worn down. For most, pain feels like an enemy to be avoided, but the Stoics saw it differently. They saw pain as a kind of training, a test that reveals the quality of the soul. Just as gold is tested by fire, so the character of a person is tested by adversity. Seneca wrote that a gladiator prays for a worthy opponent because only through battle does his skill mean anything. Without hardship, courage is nothing but an idea. With hardship, it becomes real. The habit here is to take pain and immediately ask, what is this teaching me? What muscle of the soul is this strengthening? When you are rejected, perhaps life is training your humility, showing you that your worth is not dependent on another's approval. When you fail in your work, perhaps life is training your perseverance, proving that success comes only through repeated trials. When you are struck by illness, perhaps life is training your patience, reminding you that the body is fragile, but the mind can remain free. Pain is never pleasant, but it is always useful if you learn to see it that way. Epictetus endured pain daily. As a slave, his master twisted his leg until it broke. Epictetus calmly said, "If you continue, you will break it." And when it snapped, he said only, "Did I not tell you so?" The body was damaged, but his spirit remained unbroken. That spirit came not from luck, but from habit of turning pain into training. He understood that no one can control what the body suffers, but each person can control what the mind does with it. So, when struggle comes, do not ask, "Why me?" Instead ask, "What for? What is this preparing me for? What capacity is this building?" This shift transforms pain from a curse into a coach. Life stops being a series of punishments and becomes a lifelong gymnasium where your soul is forged. Every setback is a weight added to the bar. Every hardship is a drill. Every loss is a lesson in detachment. Every failure a reminder that you can stand up again. Struggle then ceases to weaken you. It becomes the very means by which you grow stronger. But to endure this training, you must also have a place of refuge within yourself, a fortress that hardship cannot breach. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel. He wrote of retreating into himself, into a place where no pain, no insult, no chaos could reach. For him, the citadel was reason, the faculty of the mind that remained untouched no matter what the outside world inflicted. If you cultivate this habit, you build a mental stronghold that nothing can shake. How do you build such a citadel? Through daily practice. Journaling, meditation, silence, these are bricks in the wall. When you write down your thoughts, you clear away the confusion of the day. When you sit quietly, focusing only on your breath, you strengthen your ability to remain steady when storms rage. When you remind yourself of principles, justice, courage, discipline, wisdom, you reinforce the walls of your inner fortress. In time, you discover that while the world outside may be chaotic, within you there is peace. The citadel is not escape. It is not running away from the world. It is preparing yourself to face it. A soldier does not live forever in the fortress, but he trains there, arms himself there, and draws strength from it before stepping into the battlefield. In the same way, your inner citadel allows you to re-enter the world with calm strength. People will try to provoke you, life will try to overwhelm you, fate will test you, but none of it will breach the walls you have built. Modern life is filled with noise, distractions, endless demands on our attention. Without a citadel, we are constantly at the mercy of others, our minds tossed around like ships without anchors. But with it, we are grounded. We can step back, breathe, and respond instead of react. We can endure insults without injury, setbacks without despair. The habit of retreating daily into your citadel, be it 5 minutes of reflection or an hour of meditation, trains you to remain unshakable. Pain as training makes you stronger. The citadel keeps you steady. Together, they turn struggle into power. One forging your resilience through adversity, the other shielding your mind from collapse. With these habits, you learn not only to endure life's trials, but to meet them with clarity and courage, knowing that nothing outside can truly harm what you have built within. Struggle often comes wrapped in the heat of anger. Something happens that feels unjust, someone wrongs you, or life itself seems to have singled you out. The flame rises quickly. You feel your heart beat faster, your jaw tighten, your mind cloud over. Anger tells you to lash out, to strike back, to destroy. But the Stoics warned us that anger is never strength. It is a kind of temporary madness that blinds the mind and weakens the soul. Seneca wrote an entire treatise on anger, describing it as the most hideous of emotions, because it makes a person into a slave of passion rather than a master of reason. The habit, then, is to transform anger into action. This begins with awareness. The moment you feel anger rising, you must pause. Do not deny it. Do not pretend it isn't there. Simply notice it, like a spark threatening to ignite a fire. In that pause, you create space, and in that space, you can choose. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he would meet selfish people, rude people, ungrateful people, and that their behavior was the result of ignorance. Knowing this, he resolved not to be surprised or angered, but to respond with patience and understanding. Anger wants you to act instantly. Wisdom waits. In the pause, ask, will anger improve this situation? Will it heal the wound, solve the problem, or strengthen me? The answer is always no, but the energy behind anger can be redirected. It can fuel constructive action. Instead of exploding at an insult, you can channel that energy into proving your worth through deeds, not words. Instead of raging at injustice, you can channel that fire into building, protesting with clarity, or creating change without destroying yourself in the process. History is filled with examples of those who transformed anger into purposeful energy. Great leaders, philosophers, and reformers have all felt the flame, but instead of burning themselves out, they turned it into light that illuminated a path forward. That is what you must practice. Let anger arrive. Acknowledge it, pause, and then ask, how can this energy serve me? Over time, this habit makes you not colder, but stronger. You do not become emotionless, you become master of emotion, guiding it rather than being dragged by it. This is real power, not to be ruled by rage, but to rule over it. To strengthen this mastery further, the Stoics turned often to the practice of writing. Struggle feels overwhelming when it sits unspoken inside the mind. Thoughts twist, fears grow, and emotions intensify when they remain unexamined. But the moment you put them on paper, they lose much of their power. Marcus Aurelius's meditations are perhaps the greatest example of this. They were not meant for others, not written for an audience, but simply notes to himself, reminders, corrections, reflections. They are the record of a man wrestling with life's struggles, trying to bring clarity out of confusion. Writing is a habit that transforms struggle into understanding. When you are consumed with anger, grief, or fear, sit down and write exactly what you feel. Be honest, pour it out. Then step back and read your own words. Often you will see that the monster inside your head is much smaller on paper. The act of writing organizes chaos. It shows you where your thinking is distorted, where you are making assumptions, where you are feeding your suffering instead of facing it. Journaling also becomes a mirror. Over time, as you record your struggles, you begin to notice patterns. Perhaps you always grow angry in the same situations or anxious over the same fears. This awareness is the first step toward mastery. Epictetus told his students to examine their impressions carefully, to test them before accepting them as truth. Writing does exactly this. It gives you space to test your thoughts, to question whether they are grounded in reality or in illusion. In practical terms, this habit does not require hours. 5 minutes in the morning or evening is enough. Write what you fear today. Write what upset you. Write what you learned. Ask yourself, did I live according to my principles? Did I allow myself to be ruled by passion? Did I make progress? Over time, these pages become your training manual, a record of your battles and your victories, and when you read them months or years later, you see the growth that came from struggle. Struggle thrives in silence, in the unspoken corners of the mind, but once you drag it into the light of words, it becomes manageable, understandable, even useful. This is why Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling the largest empire of his time, still turned each night to his notebook to remind himself of who he was and who he wanted to be. You can do the same. In your writing, you transform struggle into clarity, confusion into direction, pain into wisdom. And clarity, more than anything, is power. Every life meets obstacles. Plans fail, doors close, paths vanish, and what you thought was secure suddenly collapses. For many, obstacles become excuses to stop, reasons to surrender. But for the Stoic, the obstacle is never the end of the road, it is the road itself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This was not poetic comfort, it was a survival strategy. The emperor who faced plagues, wars, and political betrayal trained himself to see every block as a chance to create a new route. The habit, then, is to reframe obstacles as opportunities. The practice begins with a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, How can this serve me? That small change opens the door to transformation. A failed business becomes the lesson that makes the next one stronger. A broken relationship becomes the training ground for patience, empathy, or self-respect. An illness becomes a test of endurance, a reminder of what truly matters. The obstacle remains, but your relationship to it changes. What once looked like a wall now becomes a stepping stone. Consider the Roman general who, finding a river blocking his army's path, did not turn back but taught his men to build a bridge. Or the inventor who, faced with constant failure, refined his methods until discovery emerged. These are not extraordinary stories. They are echoes of what anyone can do when they see obstacles not as endings but beginnings. Each time life blocks you, you are being invited to exercise creativity, resilience, courage, or humility. And the more you accept the invitation, the stronger you become. The practical habit is this: when you hit a wall, pause and write down 3 ways it could help you grow. Not just vague hope, but concrete ways. Perhaps the delay teaches patience. Perhaps the rejection toughens your resolve. Perhaps the loss clears the way for something better. This exercise forces the mind out of complaint and into creativity. Over time, it becomes automatic. The moment struggle appears, you begin searching for the hidden gift. And once you discover it, you realize the obstacle was not your enemy, it was your ally in disguise. Yet, even as we practice reframing obstacles, we must confront the greatest one of all, mortality. Death is the final struggle, the shadow that follows us from birth. Most people flee from the thought of it, pretending it does not exist, living as though life will stretch on forever. But the Stoics turned toward it. They practiced memento mori, remembering death, not to be morbid, but to be free. For when you accept death, life no longer terrifies you. Struggles lose their sting because you see them for what they are, temporary, fleeting moments on the path toward the inevitable. Marcus Aurelius wrote often of death, reminding himself that kings and slaves alike meet the same fate, that the names of the mighty fade just as quickly as the forgotten. Seneca advised rehearsing death daily, not to despair, but to strip away illusions of permanence. Epictetus told his students, "When you kiss your child, whisper to yourself that they are mortal, so you may never cling in desperation, but love them more deeply now." The habit of training with mortality can be simple. Each morning remind yourself, "I may not see the evening." Each evening remind yourself, "I may not see the dawn." This is not to live in fear, but to sharpen your awareness. Suddenly, every conversation matters more. Every act of kindness carries weight. Every wasted hour becomes painful to imagine. Death gives urgency to life. It reminds you that struggle itself is temporary, that every hardship will one day dissolve, just as every pleasure will. Nothing lasts. And because nothing lasts, everything is precious. In facing death, you gain courage. Fear loses its hold because the worst that can happen, the end of life, is not avoided by fear. It comes regardless. But if you can accept it, then no other struggle can truly overwhelm you. Loss, failure, rejection, all are lighter when weighed against mortality. You see them as small ripples in the stream of time. This does not make you careless, it makes you attentive. You begin to live with greater intensity, greater gratitude, greater freedom. Death becomes the ultimate teacher, reminding you that struggle, far from being your enemy, is the raw material out of which a meaningful life is shaped. Struggle feels heaviest when we carry it alone, when every hardship circles endlessly in the chambers of our own mind. But the Stoics discovered something powerful. When we turn our struggles into service, their weight becomes lighter. Pain that is endured only for ourselves can crush us. Pain that is transformed into help for others can ennoble us. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he was born for the service of others, not for isolation or selfishness. A life lived only for the self becomes small, fragile, and easily broken. A life lived in service to others becomes vast, resilient, and deeply meaningful. The habit here is to find strength in service. Whatever struggle you face, ask, how can this be used to help someone else? If you've been rejected, you can guide someone else through rejection. If you've lost, you can comfort someone else who is grieving. If you've failed, you can teach another how to rise again. In this way, struggle stops being wasted energy. It becomes fuel for empathy, mentorship, and connection. Even the deepest wounds can be turned into gifts. A person who has endured betrayal understands the pain of another betrayed soul. A person who has suffered illness understands the fears of another patient. These shared experiences transform suffering into bridges between hearts. Seneca believed that true greatness was found in how we uplift others. Struggles that might have crushed him instead became lessons he passed on in his letters, lessons that have guided countless people for centuries. He turned his hardships into wisdom for others. You can do the same. Every time you face adversity, remind yourself, this is not only for me. This can be used. This can be shared. Service turns private pain into public strength. And when you make service a habit, you begin to realize that life's struggles were never meant to be endured in isolation. They were meant to be woven into the collective story of humanity, teaching and strengthening not just the individual, but the whole. Your pain becomes part of something larger, and in that larger purpose, you discover a strength you never knew you had. To live this way requires a deeper foundation, though. It requires that your life be guided not by fleeting feelings, but by enduring principles. Struggle becomes unbearable when we are tossed about by emotion, when every storm of anger, fear, or sadness directs our course. But when we root ourselves in principles, we gain stability. The Stoics taught that virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, discipline should guide every action. Emotions rise and fall like waves, but principles stand firm like rocks. The habit here is to live by principles, not feelings. This means defining clearly the values by which you will act, no matter the circumstance. Perhaps one of your principles is to act with honesty, even when lying would be easier. Perhaps another is to remain calm, even when provoked. Perhaps another is to work diligently, even when no one is watching. By writing these principles down and reminding yourself of them daily, you create a compass that does not waver when storms arrive. Epictetus reminded his students not to say what is right in theory, but to live it in practice. Feelings are unreliable guides. They can urge you to abandon your duty, betray your integrity, or surrender your strength. Principles prevent this. When you live by them, you are no longer controlled by passing moods. You act from conviction, not convenience. And in doing so, you turn struggle into a proving ground. Every difficulty becomes a test. Will you remain true to your principles, or will you abandon them? If you hold firm, the struggle becomes fuel for virtue. This way of living also frees you from regret. If you act only from feelings, you will often look back with shame. If you act from principles, you may suffer hardship, but you will not suffer self-contempt. Your conscience remains clear. Marcus Aurelius endured endless challenges, but he clung to principle, and because of that, his legacy endures. Not because he was emperor, but because he was a man of character. To adopt this habit is to anchor your life in something unshakable. Struggles will still come. Emotions will still surge. But like a sailor guided by the stars, you will not lose your way. You will move through hardship with direction, with purpose, with the knowledge that you are living not by chance, but by choice. This is true strength, not to be ruled by what you feel, but to be guided by what you know to be right. Every day is filled with choices, victories, mistakes, and lessons. But most people rush through their days without ever stopping to examine them. They repeat the same errors, fall into the same traps, and wonder why their struggles never seem to lead to growth. The Stoics, however, knew that the habit of reflection could turn every day into a teacher. Epictetus advised his students to sit in judgment of themselves each evening. Seneca wrote that he questioned himself nightly. What did I do well? What could I have done better? What lessons will I carry forward? By reflecting daily, they transformed struggle into wisdom. The habit here is daily reflection. At the end of the day, pause. Do not let the rush of tomorrow steal the lessons of today. Ask yourself, how did I respond to difficulty? Did I live by my principles? Did I let anger or fear control me? What moment tested me most, and how did I perform? Write it down if you can. Reflection is sharper when it is visible on paper. Over time, the patterns emerge. You see not only your weaknesses, but also your progress. You realize that the struggle you thought was meaningless was actually a mirror, showing you where you most need to grow. This practice does not require hours. 10 minutes is enough. The point is not to shame yourself, but to sharpen yourself. If you failed today, you can plan to act differently tomorrow. If you succeeded, you can reinforce the habit. Struggle then becomes raw data, fuel for improvement instead of wasted pain. Without reflection, life repeats itself in endless cycles. With reflection, every hardship becomes a step upward. You stop stumbling in darkness and begin climbing with awareness. The Stoics believed that an unexamined life was weak, but a life of daily reflection was strong, because it turned every battle into a lesson that built greater strength for the next. Still, in all this striving and training, one virtue quietly underlies everything: patience. Struggle often feels unbearable because we want instant resolution. We demand quick results, fast healing, immediate answers. But life does not bend to impatience. Growth takes time, healing takes time, mastery takes time. The Stoics taught patience not as passive waiting, but as active endurance. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to accept the pace of nature, that all things unfold in their proper season. Seneca told us that time is a healer if only we allow it to work. Patience does not mean doing nothing. It means doing the work without demanding when the harvest will come. A seed planted today does not bear fruit tomorrow. Training the mind and the soul is no different. The habit of patience is to keep showing up, to keep practicing, to keep enduring, even when you do not see results yet. Struggle is often prolonged, but impatience only multiplies the suffering. When you accept that hardship takes time, it becomes easier to bear. In your own life, practice patience with your goals, with your failures, with others, and with yourself. Do not expect perfection instantly. Do not expect mastery in a single attempt. Let time work alongside your effort. Endure without complaint, knowing that growth is unfolding even when you cannot yet see it. Just as the strongest trees take decades to grow, the strongest souls take years of trial, error, and endurance. Patience also frees you from despair. When hardship lingers, impatience whispers that it will never end, but patience reminds you, all things pass. This moment, however heavy, will not last forever, and in the meantime, you can endure it with dignity. By cultivating patience, you strip struggle of its sharpest teeth. You learn to carry weight slowly, steadily, until one day you realize it has become lighter. Daily reflection gives meaning to every struggle. Patience gives endurance through every struggle. Together, they transform hardship into a lifelong teacher, and they remind you that the path of growth is not a sprint, but a steady, disciplined journey. Struggle has a way of loosening our tongues. When pain grips us, when frustration builds, the temptation to complain, argue, or lash out with words becomes overwhelming. Yet the Stoics warned that words once spoken cannot be recalled. Seneca reminded us that silence is often the safest response, because speech can bind us to anger, to gossip, to weakness. Epictetus told his students that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that we should use them in proportion. In other words, wisdom listens more than it speaks. The habit, then, is to speak less and listen more. This is not about suppressing your voice, but about choosing words with care. Struggle will tempt you to pour out complaints, to give power to your suffering by speaking of it endlessly. But when you withhold complaint, you deny struggle that power. Silence, when chosen wisely, becomes a form of strength. Listening, too, transforms hardship. By listening deeply to others, you learn that your pain is not unique, that suffering is shared by all humanity. In hearing the stories of others, you gain perspective, humility, and compassion. In practical terms, this habit can be trained. Before speaking in anger, pause and ask, "Is this necessary? Will these words improve the situation, or will they add to the burden?" Often, silence is stronger. When listening, remind yourself to attend fully without preparing your reply in your head. Struggle shrinks when we listen, because it reminds us that we are not alone in it. Wisdom grows when we restrain our tongues, because silence protects us from regret. The less you speak from impulse, the more your words carry weight when you finally choose to speak. This discipline also builds inner mastery. A person who cannot control their tongue cannot control their life. But one who can restrain words, even in the heat of pain, demonstrates a rare power: self-command. And self-command is what transforms struggle into strength. In every hardship, choose fewer words, deeper listening, and let your silence become your shield. Alongside restraint comes another vital habit: celebrating progress, not perfection. Many are crushed beneath struggle because they demand flawless results from themselves. They measure success only in final victories, ignoring the small steps along the way. The Stoics rejected this pursuit of perfection. They knew that growth is gradual, that virtue is cultivated day by day, and that progress itself is worthy of celebration. Marcus Aurelius wrote of living each day according to nature and reason, never demanding perfection, only sincerity of effort. The habit here is to track and honor small victories. Did you remain calm today where yesterday you would have erupted in anger? That is progress. Did you reflect at night when before you rushed to bed thoughtlessly? That is progress. Did you choose patience once, even if you failed 100 other times? That is progress. Struggle becomes unbearable when you measure it against the impossible standard of perfection. But when you see it as training, where every small improvement counts, you transform it into a ladder you can climb step by step. Seneca advised his students to rejoice not in who they will be someday, but in who they are becoming. Every slight correction, every small victory is evidence of transformation. Perfection is an illusion, a horizon that always recedes. But progress is real, measurable, and deeply empowering. By celebrating progress, you encourage yourself to continue. You no longer despise your failures because they are woven into a story of gradual improvement. This habit also builds resilience. When perfection is your goal, every mistake feels like total failure. But when progress is your aim, mistakes become teachers, not tyrants. You see them as part of the process, not as proof of weakness. Over time, the burden of struggle lightens because you no longer demand to leap over it in one motion. You simply take the next step. So each night, as you reflect, notice where you have grown, however slightly. Celebrate that movement. Encourage yourself with the truth that even the smallest progress accumulates. A river carves stone not by one great strike, but by steady persistence. In the same way, your progress, slow and steady, will carve strength out of your struggles. To celebrate it is not arrogance, it is fuel for the journey. By focusing on progress over perfection, you turn struggle into a companion that shapes you rather than a master that breaks you. Struggle will always be with you. It does not ask permission, it does not arrive at a convenient hour, and it does not care whether you are ready. But now you have seen that it is not the enemy. It is the raw material from which power is forged. The 15 habits you have learned are not abstract ideas. They are practical weapons, shields, and tools. They are disciplines that turn the chaos of hardship into the order of strength. They are the difference between being crushed by life and being carved into someone capable of enduring, someone capable of greatness. Think back through them. You began by learning to embrace voluntary discomfort, to practice small hardships so that larger ones do not overwhelm you. You learned to focus only on what you can control, freeing yourself from the endless drain of worrying about the uncontrollable. You practiced negative visualization, imagining loss not to despair, but to deepen your gratitude and prepare for the storms of fate. You chose to see pain as training, as the exercise that makes the soul stronger. You built an inner citadel, a fortress of reason and reflection that no insult, no chaos, no disaster can breach. You learned to transform anger into action, turning destructive fire into constructive energy. You turned to writing, making your journal a mirror that shows you where you stand and where you must go. You reframed obstacles as opportunities, understanding that what stands in your way can become the very path forward. You trained with mortality, remembering that life is fleeting, and in that remembrance you discovered urgency and freedom. You learned to find strength in service, to use your pain to lift others rather than hoard it in isolation. You chose to live by principles instead of fleeting emotions, anchoring yourself in unshakable values. You practiced daily reflection, turning each day's mistakes and victories into lessons. You cultivated patience, refusing to demand that growth happen overnight, trusting instead in steady endurance. You disciplined your tongue, speaking less and listening more, finding that silence and attention bring wisdom. And finally, you celebrated progress over perfection, realizing that each small step forward is victory enough, and that the pursuit of impossible perfection only paralyzes the soul. Together, these habits form a way of life. They do not eliminate struggle, they transform it. The fire that once burned you now hardens you. The weight that once crushed you now strengthens you. The losses that once devastated you now deepen your gratitude. The obstacles that once stopped you now guide you toward better paths. In every place where life once seemed only to wound, it now also teaches, sharpens, and shapes. The Stoics did not dream of lives free from hardship. They knew such a life does not exist. Instead, they taught us to meet struggle with dignity, to turn it into the very means by which we grow into our best selves. Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, betrayal, and death, yet left behind meditations that still guide us. Epictetus endured slavery and crippling pain, yet trained his students to see freedom within their minds. Seneca walked through exile and danger, yet left behind letters filled with wisdom for those who would come centuries later. They were not spared from struggle. They were elevated by it. And so can you. Struggle is already here. The question is not whether it will come, but whether you will meet it with despair or with discipline. These 15 habits are your answer. They are not easy, but they are within your reach. Begin with one. Practice it daily. Add another. Over time, you will find yourself changing. The hardships that once broke you will now build you. The challenges that once frightened you will now fortify you. There will be days when you stumble, when you forget, when you give in to fear or anger. Do not mistake those days for failure. They are part of the training. Remember, perfection is not the goal. Progress is. Each return to these habits is another step forward, another stone added to the fortress of your soul. So let this be your call. Do not run from struggle. Do not curse it. Welcome it. Use it. Bend it until it serves you. For in the end, power does not come from avoiding hardship. It comes from transforming it. Your greatest ally in becoming who you are meant to be is the very thing you once feared, the struggle itself. Now the choice is yours. You can let hardship define you as a victim, or you can let it refine you as a victor. The Stoics have shown the way. The habits are in your hands. Begin today and turn every struggle into power.